Evelyn tightened her grip on her gloves, her pulse racing. The air inside the warehouse felt thick, suffocating. Mr. Larkin's voice sliced through the tension. "If you walk out, don't bother coming back." Maria didn't flinch. She met his glare with unwavering defiance. "Then we won't." Hector exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "No, Mr. Larkin. You should be grateful that we show up every day and keep this place running." Silence. Then a worker near the back hesitated before asking, "Are we really doing this?" Maria raised her voice. "If you're ready to stand up for yourselves, walk out with us. Now." One by one, workers dropped their tools, their decision echoing louder than words. As they stepped into the cold evening, reality settled in. They had risked everything. Now, the real fight began. Evelyn Carter sat at her sleek glass desk, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter Systems Group's headquarters. Her inbox was full, her phone buzzed with meeting reminders, and her assistant had just handed her a list of reports that needed reviewing. But when Miguel Alvarez, a longtime contractor, requested a private meeting, she put everything on hold. Miguel wasn't the type to waste time. If he was here, it was important. He sat across from her, his hands folded tightly in his lap, the lines on his weathered face drawn with hesitation. He had worked with the company for over a decade, overseeing facility maintenance, and had always been professional, reliable, and steady. But today, there was something different in his expression. "Miguel, what's on your mind?" Evelyn asked, leaning forward. He exhaled, glancing down before meeting her gaze. "Ms. Carter. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I can't ignore it anymore." Evelyn's brows furrowed. "Ignore what?" He hesitated again, clearly choosing his words carefully. "The way some of your employees treat the janitorial staff. It's bad, ma'am. Worse than you probably realize." Evelyn blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Mistreatment? What do you mean?" Miguel shifted in his seat. "Disrespect. Being ignored, talked down to, even mocked. I've seen employees leave trash on the floor on purpose, just because they assume the janitors will clean it up. Some of them won't even acknowledge the cleaning crew when they walk by, like they're not even people." He shook his head. "And it's not just the younger employees. Some of your senior staff are the worst offenders." Evelyn felt a wave of unease settle in her stomach. She had built this company on the values of respect, integrity, and teamwork. To hear that some of her employees, especially those in leadership, were treating people this way was unacceptable. "Why didn't anyone report this before?" she asked. Miguel hesitated. "Because they're afraid. These aren't people with fancy job titles. They can't afford to lose their jobs, so they put up with it." Evelyn inhaled sharply, her fingers tapping against the desk. She had always believed her company was different. That Carter Systems valued everyone. If Miguel was telling the truth, and she had no reason to doubt him, then she had failed to see a problem happening right under her nose. "What do you suggest?" she asked, already formulating plans in her mind. Miguel hesitated again, then finally said, "Someone needs to see it firsthand." Evelyn frowned. "How?" Miguel met her gaze. "Someone needs to walk in their shoes. Experience it. Only then will they understand." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the weight of the conversation settling over her. She didn't know it yet, but this moment was about to change everything. Evelyn Carter couldn't shake Miguel's words. The conversation played in her mind as she walked through the pristine hallways of Carter Systems Group, the hum of productivity surrounding her. Employees in tailored suits breezed past without a second glance at the custodial staff wiping down glass panels or emptying trash bins. She watched closely, noting the indifference, the way some employees didn't even acknowledge their presence. It was subtle, but it was there, a quiet dismissal of the very people who kept the office running. By the time she returned to her office, her mind was made up. If she was going to fix this problem, she needed to see it firsthand. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. That evening, she called an emergency meeting with her closest advisors, David Lynn, her chief operating officer, and Rachel Montgomery, her head of human resources. As they settled in, Evelyn got straight to the point. I need to understand what's happening with our janitorial staff. Rachel furrowed her brows. We've had no formal complaints. That doesn't mean there's no problem, Evelyn countered. I spoke with Miguel Alvarez today. He says some of our employees treat the cleaning staff like they're invisible. Worse, like they don't matter. David exhaled sharply. That's concerning. But do we have proof? Evelyn sat forward. That's why I'm going undercover. Silence filled the room. Rachel's eyes widened. Undercover? Yes. I want to see what our cleaning staff experiences daily. I'll work as a janitor for a week. No one can know who I am. David exchanged a glance with Rachel before shaking his head. Evelyn, this is extreme. You're the CEO. You have a company to run. I'm still running it, Evelyn said firmly. I can work nights, early mornings, whatever it takes. If I don't understand the problem, how can I fix it? Rachel bit her lip. This is risky. What if someone recognizes you? I'll change my appearance, Evelyn said. Dress down. Wear a uniform. No one looks twice at a janitor. David sighed. And what happens when you find something? Evelyn's expression hardened. Then we fix it. And we make sure it never happens again. The weight of her words settled over them. Rachel looked at Evelyn for a long moment before nodding. If you're really doing this, I'll make the arrangements. Evelyn exhaled, determination settling in. She had built this company on values of respect and integrity. Now, she was about to find out if those values truly existed within its walls. Evelyn stood in front of her full-length mirror, almost not recognizing herself. Gone were the tailored suits, the sleek heels, the carefully styled hair that signified her power. Instead, she wore a plain navy blue janitor's uniform, a cap pulled low over her forehead, and old sneakers that felt foreign on her feet. She had even removed her signature pearl earrings, an accessory she never left home without. This wasn't just about looking the part, it was about stepping into a reality she had never known. As she pulled her hair into a simple ponytail, she took a deep breath. This is it. By the time she arrived at Carter Systems Group, the building looked different to her. Instead of striding through the grand entrance, she used the side door, the one marked staff only. The hallway was dimly lit, the walls plain, the floors scuffed. She had never walked through this part of her own company before. At the security desk, a man in his 60s with tired eyes looked up. New hire? Evelyn hesitated before nodding. Yeah. Just started. The man grunted, barely looking at her as he handed over a time card. Clock in over there. Break room's down the hall. Supervisor will meet you soon. The indifference stung, but she shook it off. This was what she had come to experience. In the small, windowless break room, a few janitors sat in silence, sipping coffee from old mugs. Miguel was there, chatting with a younger worker who looked barely out of high school. Evelyn kept her head down, taking a seat near the corner. A woman in her 50s with a stern face walked in, clapping her hands. All right, listen up. We're short-staffed tonight, so double-check all floors. New girl, she turned to Evelyn, glancing at the name tag Rachel had arranged for her. Maggie, right? Evelyn nodded. You're on restroom duty. 5th floor. Keep up, and don't cause problems. Evelyn swallowed her pride and nodded again. Restroom duty. Fine. This is what I signed up for. With a mop bucket in tow, she stepped into the polished halls of her own empire, unseen and overlooked, ready to witness the truth from the shadows. Evelyn pushed her mop bucket down the empty hallway of the 5th floor, her footsteps muffled by the expensive carpet. She had walked this corridor countless times before, but always as the CEO, with executives trailing behind her, hanging on to her every word. Now, no one even noticed her. The janitor's uniform made her invisible. She passed by a row of offices where faint voices murmured behind closed doors. One of them belonged to her chief financial officer, Daniel Mercer. Through the glass, she could see him leaning back in his chair, laughing with another executive. She hesitated for a moment, curiosity gnawing at her. What did they talk about when she wasn't around? She edged closer, pretending to adjust her mop. She actually thought the workers respected her, Mercer scoffed. As if a Christmas bonus makes up for how overworked they are. The other man chuckled. That speech she gave last month. About how we're a family. Please. If she had to live their lives for a week, she'd quit by day 2. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. These were men she had trusted, men she had defended in board meetings. And they were laughing at her, at the very idea that she cared about her employees. She turned away, gripping the mop handle so hard her knuckles turned white. Maybe this is what I needed to hear. By the time she reached the restrooms, her mind was racing. She had convinced herself that her company treated workers fairly. She had implemented policies she believed were generous. But standing here, bucket in hand, she couldn't ignore the truth. Those policies hadn't made a difference to the people cleaning these floors. She pushed open the restroom door, bracing herself for another round of scrubbing, when she heard hushed voices inside. I can't do another double shift, a woman said, her voice weary. I haven't seen my kids in 3 days. I know, another voice replied. But if we complain, we'll get our hours cut. Or worse. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had thought she was here to see what it was like to work a tough job. But this was about more than hard work. It was about survival. As she dunked the mop into the bucket, she realized something. I don't really know my company at all. Evelyn's back ached as she carried a heavy trash bag down the service hallway. The smell of cleaning chemicals and old coffee clung to the air. Every muscle in her body protested, but she couldn't stop. It wasn't just about the physical labor, it was about what she had learned. Every conversation she overheard, every weary sigh from a fellow janitor, weighed on her like a stone. As she reached the loading dock, she saw Hector, one of the night shift janitors, struggling to lift a full bag into the dumpster. His uniform was faded, his hands calloused from years of work. She hurried to help, gripping the other side of the bag. Thanks, Hector said, exhaling. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. Didn't think I'd be getting help from the new girl. Evelyn forced a small smile. Figured I'd learn faster if I actually pulled my weight. Hector chuckled. That's a first. Most of the new hires don't last a week. She hesitated, then asked, why do people leave so quickly? Hector shook his head. Pay's too low, shifts are too long, and nobody cares about us. They say we're replaceable. Like we're not real people with families. Evelyn swallowed hard. But, don't we have benefits? He gave her a look that stung. You think health insurance means much when you can't afford to go to the doctor? Or when you're too exhausted to spend time with your kids? He let out a bitter laugh. I used to work at a factory before this. Thought this job would be better. Turns out, it's just different problems. Evelyn didn't know how to respond. She had signed off on so many policies, employee wellness programs, productivity initiatives, but none of it seemed to make a real difference. Before she could say anything, another janitor, Maria, walked up with a tired smile. Hey, Hector. You ready for break? Hector nodded and turned back to Evelyn. You coming? Evelyn blinked. A break. Something she had never thought twice about before. She nodded, following them inside. As they sat in the small break room, sipping bad coffee from paper cups, Evelyn listened. She heard stories of missed birthdays, aching joints, and the fear of losing their jobs if they complained. For the first time, she wasn't just the CEO trying to fix a problem. She was part of the workforce living it. Evelyn sat on the edge of a metal folding chair in the janitor's break room, staring into the steam rising from her coffee. The walls were bare except for a faded poster about workplace safety, and the table had scratches from years of use. The air smelled of instant coffee, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Across from her, Maria was rubbing her wrists, trying to ease the ache from hours of scrubbing floors. Hector leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed, savoring the brief moment of rest. "You're quieter than usual," Maria said, offering a tired smile. Evelyn hesitated. She had spent the past few days cleaning, listening, and learning, but she still didn't know how to put everything into words. "Just thinking." Maria chuckled. "That's dangerous around here." Evelyn forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you ever feel like nobody sees you?" Maria exchanged a glance with Hector. "All the time," she said. "People walk past us like we're part of the furniture. If we do everything right, nobody notices. If we make a mistake, we're suddenly the biggest problem in the building." Hector grunted in agreement. "You ever had an executive look right through you? Like you weren't even there?" Evelyn flinched. She had done exactly that, walked past these same people without a second thought. Maria sighed, stretching her fingers. "The worst part isn't the work. It's knowing that no matter how hard we try, it's never enough. Paychecks barely cover rent. Health insurance is a joke. And if we complain, there's 100 others ready to take our place." Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. She had read reports, seen numbers, but they had never felt real until now. Maria studied her. "Why are you really here, Evelyn?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped, her fingertips raw from scrubbing. She had come here thinking she could fix things, but now she wasn't so sure. "I wanted to understand," she admitted. Hector snorted. "And? Do you?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I'm starting to." For the first time, she wasn't just observing, she was experiencing. And it was changing everything. The fluorescent lights in the break room flickered slightly, casting a dull glow over the weary faces around Evelyn. The more she listened, the heavier her heart became. This wasn't just about work conditions, it was about survival. These people weren't just employees, they were parents, caretakers, and dreamers, all stuck in a system that seemed designed to keep them struggling. Maria leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You ever had to decide between rent and groceries?" Evelyn hesitated. The truth was, she had never worried about either. Even before her career took off, her family's wealth had ensured she never knew real financial hardship. "I can't say that I have," she admitted, her voice quiet. Maria sighed. "I have. And let me tell you, it's not much of a choice." Hector shook his head. "Forget groceries, try skipping medicine because insurance won't cover it. My son has asthma. In a good month, I can afford his inhaler. In a bad month," he trailed off, rubbing his temples. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt. She had fought for policies that, in theory, were meant to help workers. But here, in this dimly lit room, she saw the cracks in the system. Policies looked neat on paper, but they didn't translate into relief for the people who needed them most. A loud buzzer rang, signaling the end of their break. Maria and Hector groaned, pushing themselves up from their seats. "Back to reality," Maria muttered, rolling her shoulders. Evelyn stood too, feeling the soreness in her own muscles from the past few days of labor. It was a new kind of exhaustion, one that went deeper than physical fatigue. As they walked back toward their workstations, Maria glanced sideways at Evelyn. "So, what happens when you leave?" Evelyn blinked. "What do you mean?" Maria gave a wry smile. "You're not staying here forever. At some point, you'll go back to your office, your meetings, your reports. What happens then? Will any of this still matter to you? Evelyn wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that she would take what she had learned and change everything. But for the first time in her life, she realized how hard that would be. I don't know, she admitted. Maria nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Well, I hope you figure it out. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. So did she. The warehouse floor buzzed with activity as Evelyn fell back into step with the others. The hum of conveyor belts, the clatter of metal carts, and the distant beeping of forklifts created a chaotic rhythm that had become oddly familiar over the past days. But something was different today. The air felt charged, like the moments before a storm. Maria walked beside her, whispering under her breath. Something's up. Everyone's on edge. Evelyn glanced around. Workers moved with hurried tension, their eyes darting toward the break room door. Then she saw him, Mr. Larkin, the warehouse manager, standing with his arms crossed, a clipboard clutched in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but Evelyn had been in enough boardrooms to recognize controlled frustration when she saw it. The conveyor belt shuddered to a stop. A hush fell over the room. Mr. Larkin cleared his throat. I know some of you have been complaining, he began, his voice sharp. I've heard about the grumbling. The talk of unfair treatment. Let me remind you, we pay you to work, not to gossip. Evelyn felt Maria stiffen beside her. Across the floor, Hector clenched his fists. Larkin's gaze swept over the crowd. If anyone has an issue, my door is always open. But don't think for a second that organizing against company policies is going to get you anywhere. We have procedures for a reason. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She had seen this before, how corporations used fear to silence workers. She had heard executives discuss it in meetings, justifying policies that kept employees compliant. But standing here, surrounded by people who had risked their jobs just by speaking up, it felt different. Maria exhaled slowly. He's warning us. Hector muttered, more like threatening us. Silence stretched across the room. Nobody moved. Then Maria did something Evelyn hadn't expected. She took a step forward. With all due respect, sir, we're not asking for anything unreasonable. Larkin's eyes narrowed. I beg your pardon. Maria's voice remained steady. We work hard. We deserve to be treated fairly. And we deserve to be heard. A murmur rippled through the workers. A few nodded. A couple even stepped forward. Larkin's expression darkened. If you don't like the conditions here, you're free to leave. Evelyn's pulse pounded. This was it, the moment where people either stepped back in fear or held their ground. And suddenly, she realized she had a choice to make. Would she stay silent, like she had in the past? Or would she stand with them? She took a breath, then stepped forward. We're not going anywhere. The warehouse air was thick with tension. A single moment of silence stretched impossibly long after Evelyn's words. Then, the murmurs swelled, soft at first, then stronger. Workers looked at one another, as if realizing, all at once, that they weren't alone. Mr. Larkin's face twisted in frustration. He tapped his clipboard against his palm, his knuckles going white. I don't think you understand what you're doing here, he said, his voice cold. This isn't some negotiation. You either follow the rules or you don't work here. Evelyn felt a flicker of doubt, but then Maria stepped forward again, her chin lifted high. You need us just as much as we need this job, she said. Without us, this place doesn't run. Hector crossed his arms. Yeah, let's see how you hit your shipping quotas if half your workers walk out. The murmurs became words. Voices rising. She's right. We work long hours, barely get breaks. We should be paid what we're owed. This isn't fair. The collective frustration that had been simmering for weeks, months, even years, was finally boiling over. Evelyn stole a glance at Larkin. He had expected them to back down. to lower their heads and return to work. But now, she could see the calculation in his eyes. He was realizing that he had underestimated them. Enough, he snapped, raising a hand. If any of you walk out, you won't be welcomed back. Don't think we won't replace you. Maria let out a short laugh. With who? You're already short-staffed. Good luck finding people willing to work under these conditions. Larkin's jaw tightened. That's it. This conversation is over. You get back to work, or you're done here. Evelyn saw Maria's fingers curl into fists. Hector took a deep breath. The entire warehouse seemed to teeter on the edge of a decision. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice called out. Maybe it's time we stop working until we get treated fairly. Silence. Then another voice joined. Yeah. Let's see how they handle a day without us. The idea spread like wildfire. Workers turned to each other, nodding. Evelyn's heart pounded. This was it, the moment everything could change. Would they stay? Or would they walk? A heavy silence settled over the warehouse. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm, charged, expectant, waiting. Workers exchanged glances, their hands frozen over half-packed boxes and unfinished orders. The hum of conveyor belts filled the air, but no one moved. Mr. Larkin's sharp eyes scanned the crowd, searching for signs of hesitation. You all need to think carefully about what you're doing, he warned, his voice low but edged with steel. If you walk out, there's no coming back. This isn't a game. Evelyn could feel her pulse in her throat. She looked to Maria, who gave her a small, firm nod. To Hector, who clenched his jaw but said nothing. Around them, others shifted on their feet, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. Maria took a slow step forward, lifting her chin. We've thought about it, she said. And we're done being treated like we don't matter. The words rippled through the group, solidifying the moment. One by one, workers set down their tools. A woman at a packing station took off her gloves. A man near the loading dock folded his arms. Slowly, the movement spread, until more than half the floor had stopped working. Mr. Larkin's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, he snapped. This company doesn't owe you anything. You should be grateful to have a job at all. Hector exhaled sharply. No, you should be grateful that we show up every day and keep this place running. The weight of the statement settled over the warehouse. Then, a worker near the back, someone Evelyn didn't even know by name, spoke up. Are we doing this? His voice wavered slightly, but the intent was clear. Maria turned, scanning the group, then raised her voice. If you're ready to stand up for yourselves, walk out with us. Now. A moment of hesitation. Then the first worker stepped away from his station. Then another. And another. Evelyn felt her feet move before she could second-guess herself. She walked toward the exit, her heart hammering. Around her, the movement grew, a wave of people leaving behind unfinished work, ignored orders, and years of being overlooked. Larkin's shouts echoed behind them, but no one looked back. As they stepped out into the crisp evening air, the enormity of their decision settled in. They had just risked everything. Had they made the right choice? Would the company listen, or would they be replaced? And most importantly, what came next?